Hello and welcome to the SharePoint pre-course checklist. My name is Stephen Knight. I train end user and site owner SharePoint courses from Bundaberg to Perth. Ideally, I'd like to have access to your SharePoint training environment before I run a course to do these checks that we're about to see. But that's not always possible for very sound reasons like network security and available time and arranging access. I am routinely finding that the SharePoint environment I am training in is not functioning properly. And this is a problem because we need to give trainees a smooth experience of SharePoint to get their experience started off on the right foot. Now, SharePoint in the training environment may not have the same resources and attention given to it that a production environment has. Now, a production environment can be spread over a range of servers specializing in different functions. Once you get the bugs out, they stay up 24/7 and that's it, reliable. However, a training environment might be running on one server in a virtual machine. Now, SharePoint relies on a range of different technologies. These are stable in production use, but when we're restarting a virtual machine, maybe it doesn't have sufficient resources. Some services may fail to start. And problems in the training environment affect the amount of content we can actually cover and the effectiveness of the training. So we want to try and identify these problems before the course. So who's this for? This session is for IT support or setup people at training providers, because often you're more experienced in regular software training rather than SharePoint. So we need to check the environment. You could be a setup or support person, an IT help desk person at a client, because we're increasingly running SharePoint courses on site at the client's premises using an environment they've set up. Now, if you're the IT support person, you've probably got very good broad skills, but you might be new to SharePoint or you're not the SharePoint gurus. So this set of checks is to help you check that your environment's in good shape. Or you might be, like me, a trainer, and you've got prior access to the site you're going to be running a SharePoint course on, and you want to check it out and make sure it's all working. So this presentation is not going to show you how to fix every problem. My aim is to take you through a series of checks that will alert you to the fact that there are problems in your SharePoint environment, and then you'll need to go off and liaise with your IT people, with your SharePoint team, or use Dr. Google. You'll find a lot of these issues are known and discussed on internet forums, on SharePoint forums on the web. So this is to help you identify the telltale signs of particular problems that I've encountered in the past. If you'd like a copy of this script to refer to as you do the checks, I'm going to turn it into a blog post at my blog at trainascope.com, or you'll be able to get it off my main website, stephenknightraining.com.au. Don't forget the .com.au, and don't forget it's Stephen with a V. Also, if you've got questions or you think I've missed anything, please let me know. Use the YouTube comments. I'm on Google+, I'm on LinkedIn. My website has a contact form that you can use. I do welcome your feedback. You'll find me through Google. If you search for Stephen Knight, you'll find the engineer, the adult film star, and me. Okay, I'm not moonlighting, I'm just a computer trainer. So you'll find me in any modern search engine. So let's make a start. So briefly, the basic requirements for a SharePoint site owner end user course. What we're looking at is a relatively modern web browser. For SharePoint 2013, IE8 does not count as a modern browser. If you've got IE8 for legacy purposes with the compatibility settings set so it's emulating IE7, for example, we're going to have grief with SharePoint 2013 and SharePoint Online. So we need a relatively modern browser, particularly for SharePoint 2013, which is expecting a web standards environment. Ideally one other browser, for example Firefox or Chrome, so we can explore the differences for people and how most of it works, particularly with SharePoint 2013. Most of it works with the alternate web browsers, but there are some differences that we need to be aware of. Also, we're looking for desktop Office 2010 or 2013 version to match what the client has. Desktop Outlook with a user account set up, because there's a lot of sending and receiving email, particularly receiving and processing email, but we also need to connect to Outlook at various points, so it's good to have the Desktop Outlook client installed. Well, essential, really. For SharePoint 2010, we need Silverlights. When we're making lists and libraries, we get the nice little graphical interface. For SharePoint 2013, we don't really need Silverlight. So what we also need is a team site with the trainer account in an owner group for that site, and with the trainees in a members group so they're contributor or edit access, and we can bump up their level of access later on in the course as they start creating lists and libraries and sites and things themselves. So that's our basic environment that we want in place before we start doing the checks. Okay, so our first check in the series of checks is the alert icon. Now, if the alert icon in the library tab is not available, it means that SharePoint doesn't know about the Exchange server, and this is something you'll need to work with your site admin about setting up. So, where do we look for this? So I'm just going to use an existing library. I'll do this in 2013 first, then in 2010, but it's broadly the same process. So I have an existing library. If you don't have an existing library in a later check, we're going to create one anyway. In my existing library or list, this works with lists too, I go to the library tab, and in the share and track group in the middle here, in the share and track group, I am seeing the alert me icon. And when I go to alert me, I have set an alert on this library. So I'll choose set an alert on this library, and I'm just going to stick with the default settings. I'm making sure that it's got my email address as the email address. So this would be the email address of the account you're using for testing. Just checking that's important, because we need to go to that email address shortly and make sure our emails have actually come through. Otherwise, I'll just accept all the defaults. What's going to happen here, if this is working, is we will get a receipt email and acknowledgement that just confirms that it's worked. And you should get that within 5 to 10 minutes. Any longer, and that's a sign that we've got some problems. And we're usually 5 to 10 minutes, that should arrive. So I've just clicked OK there. And in due course, I'll get an alert email. While we wait for that to come through, let's hop over to SharePoint 2010 here. And in SharePoint 2010, I'm just going to go into a library. Could be an empty library. You could already have a document in here. One document at least is handy for the testing, as you'll see in a moment. So I'm in a document library, going to the library tab, share and track group that you'll notice here, just like we have in SharePoint 2013, but our alert icon is missing. Now, that's actually SharePoint saying to me, I do not have a connection to an Exchange server. which is actually something in this virtual machine I'm working with here. There is no Exchange server, so that icon is missing. It can't provide that functionality. Now that's a problem because that same functionality is used by issue tracking and workflows and probably other things as well, but issue tracking and workflows in particular, as well as alerts, and if that's not working, it's going to undermine some key things that you're wanting to do in your SharePoint course. So now another little test. Occasionally you'll see that icon showing, or let me just through the shortcut menu on a particular document. Now I'm using the drop down menu in 2010. In SharePoint 2013 you'd do this through the ellipse, and if I go to view properties, I have my alert icon here, even though Exchange is not really there. And you will get this sometimes where there's additional issues. So if I click Alert Me, I'm getting my little dialogue popping up here, and that's all looking suspiciously okay. Now, because I'm on SharePoint 2010, I have a mythical end user called Stuart Sullivan. So I'm logged in as Stuart, and I can see that looks like that's working. That's a valid person that it's going to, but when I go OK, I get an error message here which is really saying, look, we've got to talk to our system admin, and this is actually spot on to get configuration sorted out for connecting SharePoint to our mail server. So I'm just going to pause for a moment. I'll be back in a second. I'll show you what this email actually looks. So just a very quick look at the email that you'll get. This is the SharePoint 2013 email as seen in Outlook 2013, but the 2010 version is virtually identical, which is just saying, look, we have successfully set up an alert on that particular library, and you want to make sure you're getting that email, because the second issue that comes up here is not just is SharePoint and Exchange, are they talking to each other and generating the email, but are our user accounts set up properly so they're actually coming through. So if you get your email, this is a good sign. Okay, this is a good place we're at the moment. So we're still in email checking mode. What we're about to do here is create and use an issue tracking list and see what's involved there. Again, this is a list that generates email to an assigned person. Very useful functionality. Just going to create this starting in SharePoint 2010. So I'm going Site Actions, More Options. Now in my More Options dialog here, this dialog is the dialog that you get if you've got Silverlight. So for SharePoint 2010 and SharePoint courses, it's a good idea if the end user computers have the Silverlight player so they can get this nice interface. What we need to do, let's choose List, and we're going to create an issue tracking list, and I'm just heading across into the More Options. I'll call this Test Issues. Now, I should be a good person. I always preach putting in a description, just being a little bit naughty there today, but we really just want this up so we can test it. You can then delete these practice lists and libraries once you're done. Okay, so we're now on the List tab, going to List Settings over here on the far right, and I'm going to Advanced Settings. Now, what I should be seeing second or third option from the top is an option to assign, to send an email to the person who's assigned a task. Not seeing it here, which means we still have our issue with SharePoint and Exchange, and that needs to be fixed for this instance of SharePoint 2010. Now, by way of contrast, I have in SharePoint 2013 here a issue tracking list, slightly customized, but the same, effectively the same thing. I'm going to the List tab and over to List Settings just to show you what we should have seen in 2010. In our list settings, I'm going into advanced settings, and you'll notice we've got this option here, send email when ownership is assigned, the email notification option. Set that to yes if it's not already the case, and then we just need to go OK. So that's a good sign that we've got that, but let's complete the test because, again, SharePoint and Exchange can be talking. We want to make sure that we've got our email clients set up correctly. So I'm just going to very quickly generate a new item. This is done through the Items tab in 2010, but it's the same basic process. So we'll create a task, we'll assign it to somebody, and I'm just assigning it to me. So this would be the user account that you're using for testing. I won't worry about a description. You've got your various settings here. The due date, again, optional for this exercise. And the custom metadata that I've added in, again, not technically necessary, so your standard list that you might make is not going to have that last column. When I save that, within about 3 to 5 minutes, I should get an email. What we'll do is I'll bring that email up on the screen so you can see what it looks like. But that's if the email comes through, then this test is complete. And here we see the email, and here we also see that I've got keyboard dyslexia, but never mind. The emails come through, looks virtually the same, 2010, 2013. The link here, view dummy tasks, that link is the link that takes you back to the task if you want to record that you've actioned it. So our emails come through. Again, we can tick this one off, at least for the 2013 environment. For my 2010 environment, I would need to resolve the connection to Exchange. Okay, our next test is to make sure that Office and SharePoint are working well together. There's a series of tests here. We're going to look at creating new documents and making sure they save back into SharePoint, and just that our upload times for new documents work well. And then we'll get into dealing with some issues revolving around check-in dialogues and metadata and the info bars. But we'll start with the relatively straightforward ones, new documents and uploading documents. So for this exercise, I'm going to make a document library just so we can see that we'll modify as we go through. So we're heading over to Site Actions. I'm going to More Options. I'm going to the Library tab. I'm going to make a document library. I am going to go into the More Options here, because for the moment I want to make sure versioning is off. We will switch versioning and checkout on later. So this is my test library. Doesn't really need to be in the quick launch. We're only using it ourselves, and ultimately it's going to get deleted anyway. So we'll create. We now have a library. Now in SharePoint 2010, or this will work for 2013 as well, we can come up to New Document and either click on the top part of the New Document button, or you can choose directly that you want a Word document, but the default is Word document for this library. So I'm going to choose a Word document and then go OK. After a moment or three, we get a new Word document. Now, just to facilitate this, I'm just going to do a little formula here, and the code for this is in the notes. This is just a little bit of a formula that when you press enter in Word, it gives you some content, so we don't need to bother actually writing a document. I'm now going to save that, so I've just gone Control S or File Save. what we should see here, now because I'm using Office 2013, there's an extra step versus Office 2010, but we should see the current or default folder is our SharePoint test documents library, and I can choose that. For Office 2010, what you would then be seeing is what I'm seeing now, where we get the orange SharePoint logo for SharePoint 2010. For SharePoint 2013, it's a blue logo, but basically we're going into our SharePoint library. We can give our file a name. The key thing to watch here is if this is not set up correctly, basically what happens is that Office will go to save the document into My Documents or onto a shared drive, which we want to avoid that. We want this showing the correct behavior where it's actually going straight into SharePoint, into the library we actually originated it from. So that's now saved that, and we're good to go. At this point, we can just close the document, and I'll minimize Word. Now, and we now see we've got a document back here in our SharePoint library. Now, just very quickly illustrating this for SharePoint 2013, not hugely different. Basically, we can make a document library through Add an App. So I went Settings, Add an App. We'll go for a document library. I'll just go to the advanced options here, because what we want to do is we will switch on versioning, and versioning's a good thing, but just while we're testing initially, I want that off, because we will be switching versioning and checkout on later. So what we basically have here through SharePoint 2013 is the same experience. Now, just something to check with both is what you'll notice is that when I went to make a new document, it opened the Office, the Word desktop client. Now, it may open the Office web app, the browser-based application. Now, if I go to the Library tab and Library Settings, if you want it opening the desktop application, which usually we still do, then we need to go into the Library Settings, into Advanced Settings. There is an option here. In my case, it's the Server Default, which is to open in the client application. Now, that is just a setting you need to watch. You can, and often during the courses I am introducing people to the browser-based applications, particularly as people are moving more to using tablets. But if you're dealing with a traditional Office environment that people are going back to, you want them opening in the client application, and so you just need to watch that setting. You may need to liaise with your server admin to get that as the default, or at least to discuss it, because maybe there are reasons why it's not the default, but we need to be aware of that. So that's all good. So from here, we've successfully created a new document. We're now going to look at uploading, and what we're looking at with uploading is just checking response times. That's really the main thing we're after here. Alrighty, very quickly we're now going to look at uploading documents. 2013 first, then 2010. So what I'm doing here is I have a window with some test documents, and I'm just going to select this as an assortment of Word, Excel, PDFs and a PowerPoint. About this many documents is probably what you want to do with the test. None of these are particularly large. 5, 10 megabytes at most, and I'm going to drag these across. Now this is in SharePoint 2013, so I'll just let these go, and it uploads them for me. So this is pretty much happening as we speak. and uploading, uploading. And we're done. That was a little slow, but probably about the right time for that process, so they're now all uploaded. So that's with 2010, not too hard to do. About that time's probably a good time. This can present some issues because what you've got to remember in a class is we're going to have 8 to 12 people doing this. So if we're on a wireless connection, we need to think some load testing, perhaps just at least do this yourself, but you might want to maybe do it with a larger set of files or have a couple of colleagues do it at the same time, just so that we can make sure we're going to get reasonable response times, because it'll be everybody in the group doing it at once. Now let's try this with 2010 just so we can see how this works with 2010. So we're in SharePoint 2010. I'm going to choose upload multiple documents, just making sure I'm getting the right dialog. Again, I can do drag and drop. You'll notice we've got the drop folders here, drop files and folders here, so that's what I'll do. This, just as an aside, with 2013 we're dealing with web standards. What we just saw me do with 2013, you need a modern browser for that. Okay, so we've got a dialog now where it's listed all the files. We will now upload these. So it's not really a lot. It's saying they're about 2 megabytes. So they're going through and we're done. And our library refreshes. And again, that's about the response time we would like. So what we've done there is successfully uploaded a batch of documents. We've made sure our response time is reasonable. We might be having a think, gee, if this is on wireless, we need to be aware that we've got lots of people might be uploading those documents at the same time. We want to make sure the response times are reasonable. So you need to think about some of those things. Now, let's we want to make sure that the editing in the browser experience all goes well, that check-in, check-out works properly, we're getting the info bar, the right dialogues, and things are generally behaving well. So I'm going to start this with SharePoint 2010. I'm clicking on our practice document we made earlier. I'm going to start read-only because this will bring up the info bar for me. Let me just reposition Word. So what I'm seeing here, now this will be the same Word 2010, Word 2013. Info bar across the top, ribbon collapsed. I have in the info bar the option to edit the document. So we need that. We need the info bar coming up properly because it helps us show off how Office and SharePoint work well together. So I'm just going to choose to edit the document. So bear in mind, for this test, you need to be contributor level access or better. So I'm now just going to make a token change here where I might change a font. So we've made a change. I'll save and close the document. Okay, so far so good. No check-in dialog yet because we've got to activate the check-in, check-out feature. But we've got our first info bar working for editing the document. Okay, back in SharePoint, let's go to the Library tab. In the Library tab, we're going to Library Settings. And in the General Settings, let's go to Versioning Settings. And what we're going to do here, I will switch on the major and minor versions, and the critical thing I'm switching on here is the checkout. So for this test, it's the checkout, require checkout setting that actually matters. Now, using our breadcrumbs, let's return to the library itself. Again, we'll go back to our practice document we created earlier. We'll start out at read only. Now, what we're noticing this time through is we have our info bar again, but this time it's saying, look, you have to check this out to be able to modify it, because we made checkout a required setting. If I click checkout, I've now got the document checked out. Now, just a little test here. I'm just going to minimize Word for a moment and refresh the browser. We should get a little green arrow that just indicates that our document is checked out. We can see at the moment, if you can see that little screen tip there, we can see that it's checked out to Stuart Sullivan. What we're going to do now, back into Word, and again I'm just going to make a token change. Let's bring up the ribbon and we'll change the colour. Good taste is not a requirement for this exercise, so you're just making a change. Save. Now, saving doesn't provoke anything. It should just be saving back into SharePoint. And when I go to close, and I'm just using Control W, but any close method should bring this up, we should be seeing this dialog that I'm now seeing, and others will not be able to see your changes till we check our work back in. Let's go yes, we want to check it back in. Now, a known issue in some installations of Office is that you don't get that message, and then people need to go back into their libraries and check in manually. Well, you can imagine what happens in practice, of course, is they forget to check in, the phone rings, they have to deal with the next issue. So you want to make sure that's working in your test environment and in the production environment. We've now got the check-in dialog. I'm quite happy for this to be a minor version. Now, if we didn't have versioning on, you don't get the option of a minor or major version. We'll just put some notes in here about what we've done. Just preserving that for history. Okay, so we've now closed our document. And if I refresh the browser in SharePoint, the little checkout symbol has gone. Okay, so we want to make sure that that's working. It's broadly the same process with SharePoint 2013 as well, so I won't redo all the steps there for that, because if it's broadly the same process. But we want to make sure there that we're seeing the info bar, the yellow strip across the top in Word or Excel or PowerPoint, and that we're getting the check-in dialogues when we go to close at the end of the process. So that's the end of that check. We are now going to check the functionality of the Document Information Panel and Quick Edit. Document Information Panel is the one that's more likely to give us issues, but with older web browsers you may have issues with Quick Edit. So we can test these together. I'm in my test documents library. I'm going to the library tab, currently in Office 2013. Not hugely different between different versions of Office. I'm heading out to the library settings. We just need to create an extra column in our library to serve as metadata. So let's do that. So what I'm doing here, I'm looking at my columns. I'm going to create a new column. So I've gone into the library settings. We might just call this department. So which department does the document belong to? I'll make it a choice. In practice, I'd probably make this a lookup, but just for a quick test, and the description might be choose your department. For the purposes of this exercise, I will make it required. I'll scrub out the default choices and just add 3 departments in here. In the defaults, if I click in the default box, I can scrub out the default, and let's go OK. So that's given us an additional column, and it will have put itself in the default view. You'll notice there it is there. Now, what we want to do first is we want to check how this all works with the document information panel. So I'm heading up to the Files tab. I'm going to make a new document. It's firing up Word for me, which is all good. Desktop client. And you'll see in Word at the top of the document, I've got the document information panel. Now, title comes in as a piece of metadata from Word. This is actually really just an additional piece of information. It's an old Word piece of metadata. Still quite useful actually, because your file name, if you've got a system of structured file names, you can put a more free-flowing English language title to your document. So we've given our document a title. The key thing here now is we pick our additional metadata. So I'm just going to put some random text in here as we did before, except instead of equals lorem, I'm using equals rand. And then let's save this. And again, it's going back to the current folder, which is our library that we've been working with. And we'll save the document. That's the world's longest file name, but I will save that. Okay, so we've seen the document information panel appear. We should see that the same pretty much in 2010 Office, and in 2013 Word, Excel and PowerPoint all support it. With Acrobat documents now, Acrobat also kind of in its own way supports the metadata. We won't get into that right now. Okay, so let's close that document down. We're done with it. And we're in business. So that's our first test. Did the document information panel come up? Now, just a little side point. I also switched off the versioning and checkout for the purposes of this test, just to cut down the amount of stuff we've got happening. The next thing we want to test is going up to the Library tab. I should be able to choose Quick Edit, and I then in Quick Edit get this spreadsheet-like view that I can now use to choose a department. Also, if I've got checkout switched off, I can use a bit of autofill here. Just for the purposes of testing this, if you've got checkout on, it means you have to check out each individual document, because the metadata is in fact part of the document. So what we're doing is just very quickly adding some metadata, making sure that the Quick Edit panel actually works. And with SharePoint 2013, I just click Stop Editing this list. We're done. We've now signed metadata there quite successfully to all of these documents. Now, just to show you what this looks like in 2010, I've done the metadata, added the extra column in already. If I go to the Library tab, I have Datasheet instead of Quick Edit, but effectively the same functionality. I can now come into my Quick Edit view and choose a department. I also get my Excel-like autofill And now here's a little heads up. I didn't switch off the checkout functionality on this particular library, so you will notice that it's giving me some issues here and saying, look, in order to do this I must first check it out. Okay, that's actually strictly correct. So I'm going to go to standard view. Do I want to wait for this to complete? I'm going to go no, because what I will do is go back to library settings just temporarily. While you're testing this out, I will switch off the check-in, check-out, because our objective with this test is that the quick edit works. So the main thing there is when you're doing your metadata, adding that extra column in, make it required, but then also go into the versioning, switch off the checkout just to streamline the test. I now go to my datasheet view, and so that while that was a unintended mistake there, it's probably worthwhile you now understand why I would switch off the checkout just to facilitate this little exercise. In the real world, you can have metadata and checkout both on a library, but what we're really doing here is just making sure that all the features of SharePoint function correctly. With SharePoint 2013, we had a nice little stop editing link. What we need to do here with 2010 is just click standard view, and we're now back in our library and we've got our additional metadata. Now, why that's important is the document information panel does occasionally give issues. We need to be sure that we can actually see the document information panel, because we want to ultimately use this metadata for creating views, for sorting, grouping, and the metadata is also indexed for searching. So usually on day 2 of a course, I'm knowing that that metadata will now be indexed. We'll use some of that metadata for searching. So in fact, that's a nice little segue into checking our search functionality. Still got a couple of tests to go. We're going to look at searching workflows as our major two next hurdles, and then a couple of minor things after that. I should have said at the beginning of this, get a coffee before you start. In practice, when you're not listening to me, this will probably take you about half an hour to run through. I usually do this when I'm actually setting up the training site, if I'm able to actually have prior access. Rightio, let's look very quickly at checking out that your search is working. Now, I'll start with SharePoint 2013. We have our standard search box in the top right, and you would research a keyword that was in the content or titles or metadata of the documents we uploaded earlier. We'll put that keyword in, we search, and we get lots of results. What's good here is we're seeing the refiners on the left, we're seeing our date refiners, our various refiners like to focus on Word documents, for example, or PDFs, one of our nice features with SharePoint 2013, or SharePoint Online is the ability to index inside a PDF. Also, to get previews, you'll notice what we're seeing here is Acrobat and Word, where it's actually using Office to give us a preview of that PDF. I love this preview functionality. Again, this requires a modern browser to do, but you do get your preview, and it's very nice, very good quality preview that it gives us. So there we see inside an Excel spreadsheet, or Word being used to preview inside a PDF. Okay. Just as a further test, I know I've got the phrase expense details in a workbook and in a PDF. and there they are in the search results. So that's actually working for us very nicely there in SharePoint 2013 with a modern version of Internet Explorer. Now, why is this critical? This is critical because one of the big things in getting end user adoption is to have some features that offer distinct and real advantages over shared drives. The search in 2010 and 2013 is one of those features. The recycle bin's another, just as a side comment. Now let's go across into SharePoint 2010. We'll test this in SharePoint 2010. Much the same set of documents. And so there's our search. And again, we've got refiners and so on there. You'll notice the PDFs. Now, you'll still get PDFs found in 2010. It'll be based purely on the metadata unless your SharePoint site has one of the plugins installed that allows the indexing of content of PDFs. There was one from Adobe that was a freebie and one from a third party that were commonly installed for SharePoint 2010. If you've got those, you'll get indexed content from PDFs as well. But the main point of that exercise is that we are seeing SharePoint search results. You may want to test this the day after you've actually uploaded the documents, because overnight it should all be indexed. If you're not getting a good result an hour or two after the documents have been uploaded, try it again on the next day. Your SharePoint site admin should be able to advise you as to how long it'll be before documents are actually indexed. Okay, so that's our search. We're now at the 47-48 minute mark. Thank you for your patience. I'm hoping you're finding this is worthwhile. Our next major topic is checking workflows. We're looking at functionality and are the emails getting through. Curiously, the workflow related emails can still play up even if the alert related side of it is working. Also, we need to make sure that the workflow features have been enabled. Now, we might not have direct access to seeing what features are enabled, so this is a good way of working through the process and just what your errors will be if it's not working properly. So let's get into it. I'm in SharePoint 2013 or SharePoint Online. I am at my test document library. I've already gone into the library settings, into versioning, and switched on check-in, check-out again. Not the end of the world if you don't have it on, but it just gives us an extra info bar as we're testing this a little bit further on. Now, let's go to the library tab. We want to set up a very simple approval workflow, just enough to get this tested. So I'm going to go to workflow settings and I'm going to choose to add a workflow. And we're in business. So this process virtually identical between SharePoint Online, SharePoint 2013, SharePoint 2010. I'm just going to go with an approval workflow, but it can be worth your while just to check that you've got the workflows you need to cover, because if there are workflows missing from here, you'll need to get features switched on at the site or site collection level. So we've got approval, which is the one I want to look at. So, and it's a good one for testing. It's usually the one that people want to have a look at, but the others are good to have too. So I've got approval, approved policies. I've just given it a unique name. I'm happy to stick with the defaults for tasks and the history list. I'm not going to get fancy. We do in the course get fancy with some of these settings, but I just want to stick with the defaults just to get this created so we can test it, because that is our objective here. So I've just clicked next, it then says, right, who do we want to assign it to? We'll just assign it to ourselves. So whatever identity you're using for your testing, and let me just very quickly do that again. There we go. So I've just used the check names to check, and so that's going to come to me. In the request, I'll just do a basic message, please review and approve. I'll only do it at one level. In a course, we would actually possibly have this go through 2 or 3 sets of hands, but we really just wanted to keep this really, really simple. So I'm not going to set CCs or tick any of the boxes because for testing purposes we don't need them. They all do good things, but we'll save that for a course. So we've now created our workflow, and let's actually put that workflow to use. So I'm just using my breadcrumbs to head back into the library. I can then pick a document that I want to use. So I've got a document selected here. I can go up to the Files tab and out to Workflows, or you can get to this through the ellipses. I think it's probably a little bit easier to get to this through the ribbon, but you'll see it there in the ellipses, so I'll choose Workflows. Either way would take you to the same place. I'll then trigger this workflow. Now we're triggering this manually. Some of the other options that we didn't get into will trigger it automatically, but we just want to see, does the basic infrastructure work? So it brings up, gives us a chance to confirm our details. That's all good. And we'll start it off. Now this will, if it's successful, generate 2 emails. One to me as the originator of the workflow, the person that triggered it, and one to me as the person that's been assigned a task. Now, it's the second, well, we want to make sure we get 2, and the second one we have to act on. But we'll just let it get things actually up and running. Okay, now what we see, before we worry about emails or anything, is over on the far right we see in progress, and if I click this little in progress link, we should see some good news here. Now I don't have the little Visio app, and I'm not too worried about the Visio app, but if I scroll down, what I'm wanting to see is exactly what I'm seeing here. The workflow was created and one task has been created. Now, what I'm not seeing here are error messages, which is really, really good. If there were problems, SharePoint is pretty good. If it can't communicate effectively and send the emails through, you'll see it listed here, and you'll also see other faults listed here as well. To illustrate, I've created, through the same process, a workflow here in SharePoint 2010 on the same library. And so I could come in, use my shortcut menu, come down to workflows. You recognize this as being virtually identical. If I click approve policy, the only difference here is I'm sending it to Stuart Sullivan because that's my identity in SharePoint 2010. Same basic settings. I'll start the workflow. All good, no obvious error messages coming up, but when I look across to the right here, I've got my little in progress link. If I click the in progress link, just as an aside, that's a little Visio appearance there, visual representation of your workflow. What we're really interested in is down here. SharePoint is pretty good. It will list, and you'll see these here at the bottom. It's actually listing the fact that it's got errors generating the emails. In this case, there isn't a valid recipient. You'll see variations on that it hasn't been able to deliver, or other issues. It'll try and report as best it can. But usually within 5 or 10 minutes, the emails will have come through if they're ever going to come through. So let me return now back to Outlook, and I will in one moment show you there should be a receipt email and a email for us to. Now, just a very quick look at the emails that you get. This email here is the email that you get that's effectively a receipt. It's just saying to you as either the originator or somebody that was nominated as a CC that the workflow's actually started. Okay, so, and you've got a nice little link there to view the status. The 2010 version of that is virtually identical. Now, the second email that we've got here is the one where the action's actually happening. So this is telling us that we've been assigned a task. And this is a bit that we need to be able to check this and see it all the way through, because there's going to be info bars and dialogues and things popping up here. If it's not working properly, it again degrades the whole experience. So what we need to do is, and this is the same 2010 or 2013 or SharePoint Online, is we click the link to the document and it will go and get the document. Now, you may get messages to open and do various things, but we should ultimately get desktop Word opening up for us. And if we give this a moment, we should get two, and I'm not sure if Captivate's actually captured that, but you get, quite commonly, you get the checkout required info bar appearing first, and then after a moment or two, and you just sit and wait for a moment, the second info bar will appear for the workflow task. Now, we don't need to check this out. We're not editing the document. You can operate the workflow independently of having checked it out. So we're going to open the task. By clicking on open this task, we're going to approve it, and I think I can give people a well done, because at this point we're probably 58.5 minutes. So you've done well to have watched this all the way through, and I'm just going to approve, because if approving works, the rest of it will work. Just as I approve this is all running smoothly. This is as it should be working. Not always the experience though. Occasionally, particularly if your Office integrations not working, you've got problems with your info bars, you'll get issues with this that need to be dealt with before the course. But what we're experiencing here, so what's happening now is it's updating the workflow. I'll just resize this Word document so you can see that little message on the Word status bar there where it says updating the workflow. When it's successfully written it back into the various task lists and things in SharePoint, that the info bar goes away. I should get one more email saying it's all been successfully approved. I'm just going to close the Word document. I'll close this email down. Now, if I head back into my library, and again, there can be a delay with this. Can be a few minutes before it moves from in progress to approved, but you can probably see here that I've got it saying approved. I can click that to go through and see the full report. Not going to stress about not having the Visio plugin installed. That's something at my end. It's not critical for this. It's a nice to have. The critical to have is we should see at the end of our test no email errors, and within 10 minutes, let's say, it should pick up all the history and mark it off as approved. And if you get through that, you can now do a little happy dance. Now, I've got a couple of little minor checks that I'm just going to let you read. I've just got slides for the last couple of little checks that you can do. But what we've worked through now is the big stuff. So hopefully that's all gone well for you. If you've run into problems, this is where you need to be talking with your SharePoint site admins There are a lot of articles on Google on resolving the underlying issues, so feel free to search. But the idea here of this set of checks is that you and I can do these as trainers or help desk support people, not necessarily as SharePoint server admins. But if you run into the issues I've identified and in certain cases actually demonstrated, then these are your clues, if you like, that there are issues, and then you can use those clues to try and resolve them so that you have a smooth running SharePoint course. So thank you for your efforts there, and please use the contact details via YouTube, Google+, any pretty much method I'll respond to. Get in touch. I'm happy to answer questions. What I can't solve for you is the weird stuff that happens with your SharePoint setup, because I'm not a server admin. My territory is the end user side of things.